What's up, YouTube? We're going to talk essential metal today. Back when I used to just upload these random, unfiltered rants about stuff, I actually did a couple videos like this. I'll link them on the side of this video. I did one on Black Label Society, Order the Black, and I did one on the band Darkest Hour. But what I want to do now is make this kind of almost like a more polished series where I discuss metal that, to me, is essential. That should be in every Metalhead CD collection. Basically go through the album, almost like in a review style, and then make some basic points on why this really stands out to me. And believe me, I realize that the amount of debate in the metal community that the word essential is going to spark is borderline disastrous, but that's what's so fun about it. We're not going to talk about, oh, you should have Master of Puppets by Metallica. You should have Morbid Angel's album, Altars of Madness. No, we're going to go into slightly deeper releases, not deeper in terms of being underground, but just picks that aren't so obvious. Like the first two I did, Order the Black is not this enormous landmark heavy metal record. I just decided to make an argument for why I think every metalhead should own it. So the basic premise is this album or this artist is phenomenal for XYZ reason within whatever specific subgenre or whatever context it sits in, and this is why I think as a metal fan you should own it. That's essentially what I'll be doing with this series. Which brings us to this Godless Endeavor, the sixth album by the band Nevermore, released July 2005. Now, before they disbanded in 2011, Nevermore was this incredibly unique blend of thrash metal, power metal, a few elements of progressive metal, and some extreme metal all kind of mixed in. They're kind of like the band Death in that their entire discography does not have a dud. Every album has its merits. But in terms of their crowning achievement, I feel like the fan base tends to toggle between Dreaming Neon Black, their third album, Dead Heart in a Dead World, their fourth album, and this one, this Godless Endeavor, their sixth. Are Dreaming Neon Black and Dead Heart great albums? Of course they are. But this Godless Endeavor is my choice, and what I want to do is go through some of these tracks and make my arguments for why I think this is the Nevermore album, if you're going to pick one that everyone should own. First thing you got to mention about this, though, is that it was produced by Andy Sneap, a legendary metal producer, involved with albums like Blood of the Nations by Accept, their recent great comeback, Dark Roots of the Earth, Testament. He was involved in Alive or Just Breathing by Killswitch Engage. He produced Megadeth, United Abominations. So this album, sonically, is impeccable, as expected. With that in mind, let's get into some tracks. The album starts out with Born, which really begins things at breakneck pace. What I find funniest about Born, though, is that it's this long 5-minute intricate song, but it's almost like a pop song in that there's this chorus that's so epic and grand and irresistible that it almost feels like the entire song is just building up to this chorus, which might be my favorite chorus I've ever heard from singer Warrell Dane. It is just absolutely mind-blowing, which is probably why the second verse is chopped in half. It's half the repetitions of the first chorus because you just want to get, once you hear the chorus once, you want to get right to it again. And we get this shredding solo from guitarist Jeff Loomis over several changing grooves. I definitely want to talk about him because he's such a integral part of what makes Nevermore great. It's really cliche to say, but his solos are like songs within songs. He really likes his motifs. So even though he is, by all accounts, an extreme technical shredder, playing a lot of super fast sweep arpeggios and diminished licks on harmonic minor, his solos really are songs within songs. It's like the most painful cliche ever, but when you hear these motify solos, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But even beyond its insanely good chorus, Born is just an essential track because it's just a blistering open to this album. This is not an album that starts slow. In terms of speed or quality, we're launching right into one of the better tracks, which really just engulfs you right away as a listener. The second track, Final Product, is notable because it begins with one of the most straightforward metal lyrics I've ever heard. Like a lot of times in metal, lyrics are kind of disguised in either fantastical metaphors or just vocals that you can't even understand. But with Final Product, the media loves the latest tragic suicide. It just, whenever I hear this one, I'm reminded that even though musically this album is basically flawless, lyrically, it makes some really powerful statements. Bleak statements about the world and religion and everything and politics. Bleak but powerful, as is appropriate in many metal subgenres. Musically, Final Product, it's pummeling, it's unrelenting, as many of these tracks are. Of course, we'll get into some of the beautiful contrasts that Nevermore plays with their softer side. Particularly noteworthy is that really, really heavy triplet breakdown in the middle of Final Product. And, as I mentioned, Jeff Loomis loves his motifs, and in terms of a motify solo, Final Product is one of the best examples on the entire album. The third track, My Acid Words, is another highlight, just this thrashy riff fest, and then we go into Bittersweet Feast, the fourth song, which is noteworthy because most Nevermore albums have like a sludgier, slower fourth song to kind of bring everything in. But Bittersweet Feast is probably my favorite of all the sludgy fourth songs on Nevermore albums because at least it varies up tempos. Like, the problem I have, like on Dead Heart and Dead World, the fourth song is Evolution 169, which I feel like is a momentum killer on that album. Whereas this song, it's slow, but it alternates between tempos. It's not a ballad or like a come down song. It's more of a dynamic song. But overall, this is saying a lot because it's a great tune. Bittersweet Feast is actually my least favorite on the album, and I'll get to why later, which is probably more has to do with how good the rest of the album is, if anything. Case in point, the next track, Sentient Number 6, which it's a ballad of sorts, but it's a ballad in the way that like Metallica's One is a ballad, if that makes any sense. The piano fits in really nicely on this track, especially around the 1 minute mark when it actually becomes central to the song's melodic content. There's this gorgeous, gorgeous melody line that gets repeated by the piano. And then after the first chorus, once the acoustic guitar comes in, you're just engulfed in despair as a listener. Warrell Dane's performance on this track and on Sell My Heart for Stones, which we'll get to later, are just mind-boggling. I don't understand how he's able to draw that much negative emotion out of a listener, but in a beautiful way. And another really important shout out here is the lyrics. I love when, because in metal, a lot of times lyrics are like an afterthought. But listen to these. Blind I suffer, knowing I'll never reach your heaven. It's unattainable. Please teach me how to dream. I long to be more than a machine. Damn, look. If you don't like this song, kill yourself. Don't actually kill yourself, but I would think about it. Please excuse that last joke, guys. I tend to get pretty passionate about a bunch of these songs, to say the least. Okay, Medicaid Nation, the next track on here. It's a phenomenal groove metal song. It comes in with quite possibly the ugliest opening riff ever to be laid down, but that's part of what makes it so heavy and aggressive. But for me, Medicaid Nation comes together at the ultra catchy chorus riff. You know exactly what I'm talking about when you hear the tune. Special shout out to the guitar solo in this one because it begins with this really speedy open string riff that essentially is the climax of the song in some ways because it takes it from a mid-tempo groove song to a ripper like that. It just completely transforms the song halfway through. Oh, and did I mention lyrics? I think I mentioned the lyrics are pretty good on this thing. Let's see. In a medicated nation of blind neurotics, I am psychotic pain baptized in pure narcotics. Case closed. So skipping over the Holocaust of Thought, which is an instrumental, we get to Sell My Heart for Stones, which is a decidedly deep cut, but over time, with more and more listens, is actually evolved into one of my favorites. It's kind of, in a lot of ways, the companion piece to Sentient Number 6 because it has all the qualities that make that song great, except without a lot of the bells and whistles. Chorus-wise, it's pretty much right under Born, which says a lot if you've heard the song Born, which I hope you have by now. Just so much anguish and so much despair communicated in such an unmistakable way. Warrell Dane, his psyche on this album is like completely transparent. And he's, not to mention, he sings like the tortured cousin of Rob Halford. The Psalm of Lydia, the next track, comes at kind of a perfect time now because between Sentient Number 6 and the instrumental and Sell My Heart for Stones, it's like, oh, maybe this album is slowed down now. Maybe there's not really a lot of thrash. And then you get hit with the classic thrash riff of the album. What's funny is like the Psalm of Lydia is a great tune, but it's almost a placeholder because the final pair of songs, Future Uncertain and the title track, are just so otherworldly in terms of closing the album out. But that doesn't mean to take away from this track, which has some fun moments. Like there's a guitar solo, like an acoustic guitar solo, which reminds me a lot, of course, of Megadeth's Holy Wars, which is fun. All right, so we're at the last two tracks now. A Future Uncertain is very much a ballad fake-out. You'll know exactly what I mean 90 seconds in when it becomes a flat-out ripper. So when you hear the acoustic guitar, I would just wait a bit. Give it like a minute and a half, see what happens. What's funny about this one, though, is it's one of the better songs on the album. It's outstanding, but at this point, I'm so anxious to get to the title track and talk about it, which is sometimes how I feel when I'm listening. But I mean, saying skip over a future uncertain to get to this Godless Endeavor is like saying, yeah, listen to Master Puppets, but don't bother with Ride the Lightning. Alright, the album closer and title track, This Godless Endeavor. This is a song that, for me at least, is very difficult to put into words. I mean, Masterpiece comes to mind, but I feel like even that feels a little cheap. I will say this in terms of concrete things, though. The verse groove. The groove that is played in the verses of this song is one of my favorite grooves I've ever heard. It just builds so perfectly to that moment that when the groove kicks in, it just, every metal fan knows that adrenaline rush, so I don't need to describe the feeling, but you'll know when you hear it. Musically, this song is the perfect example of how to slowly build a metal song, starting with these nice light acoustic touches, segueing into slow, mean, distorted guitars, then bursting into a speedy double bass riff, and then allowing this magnificent verse groove to kind of rein everything in. And the band does a great job throughout the 8+ minutes of coming back and circling back to all these various memorable parts and still making it feel like a song. This is by far my favorite song on this Godless Endeavor, and I couldn't think of a better way to close this album out. Okay, so final thoughts. Why do you need to hear this, besides the fact that it gives me a giant music boner? Well, this album embodies the main quality that made Nevermore so incredibly special. It was their ability to take ugly, hideous things and make them beautiful. Or, depending on how you look at it, take beautiful things and make them completely ugly and hideous. This is an uncompromisingly dark album. Seriously, there is not a light, fun, happy moment in any of these 11 tracks, hour-plus runtime. It has a vision that it executes and beats you over the head with in a very musical, dynamic, at times dazzling way. The musicianship is utterly virtuosic. It makes some very interesting and thought-provoking lyrical statements, and it proves to make a dark, apocalyptic sounding album, you don't have to have screaming vocals. This is a sung album, and yet it's one of the darkest albums I can think of off the top of my head or digging through my music collection. Simply put, if you like metal of any kind, this is an album you have to own. Yeah, I said own. Own. Not hear once. Own. So, Nevermore, this Godless Endeavor. In all seriousness, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this album. I'm assuming a lot of metal fans who are watching this will have heard it. If you haven't, or if you have, let me know in the comment section what you think of this album. Do you think it's as great as I say it is? Or am I wrong? Am I stupid? Is Dead Heart in a Dead World a much better album, which I might have told you 3 years ago? Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe, leave a comment, shoot me a message so we can keep talking music, and I'll see you guys soon.